Okay, now we are going towards the night section of the biodiversity. But this is a very interesting image. What I've done over here is at night I have taken a UV light, but it is usually this UV light is something that is carcinogenic, in the sense it can negatively impact our DNA that is seen in our cells. The corals, especially that are in the shallower region, what happens is they face the UV rays from the sun the entire day, so they also need protection, or else their DNA and their they will also face degeneration. So these corals, they release chemicals which are more like anti UV, yeah, UV, what we call sunscreen. Okay, it's like sunscreen that reflects the UV rays. So that's why over here what you can see is biofluorescence. Biofluorescence means any organism that is showing a reflectance of a particular spectrum of light or something like that. Okay, so over here what the coral is doing is it is reflecting UV light in a different spectrum. So that's why by this experiment I can show that the corals have chemicals which reflects UV lights, and that protects them from the harmful UV rays of the sun. Here you can see a small clownfish, baby clownfish, living inside a sea anemone while lit under the UV light. Here you have a different species of coral called solitary corals. Most of the other corals will live in big colonies. Yeah, but over here these corals, they actually live solitarily, and have means they live in a group but they will not be attached to each other. So these are called solitary corals, and they have a different spectrum of light that they reflect. So basically here you have a image of a adult coral. So this is actually not exactly a coral. This is actually called a zoantid, but it's a very close relative of a coral, and will help me explain it much better. So over in a coral, what happens is coral is not an individual animal. Okay, it is actually a group of many smaller animals living together. So you can see each and every hexagon or the circular pattern is one animal called a polyp. Okay, each polyp is like a animal, like a jellyfish, which will have a stomach, it will have a mouth and a ring of tentacles around it. So those tentacles will allow it to grab a prey, and eggs and shells and larvae of different small planktons, and eat those, right? But now what happens is, as I told you earlier also, in these habitats, land and rocks is like a real estate. Basically all these animals, your sea sponges, your clams, your algae, your corals, all of them need rocks to attach and grow on. So it's like a city. In cities what happens is everyone is struggling to find a good place to live, right? And there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of high price real estate. Okay, so in the cities what we have done is, instead of building bungalows, what we have done is we have started building skyscrapers, right? So the same way what corals do is, the corals also have started building their own structures. So they starts from a small piece of land which is like a foundation, and then they start collecting salt from the ocean, calcium carbonate. They use high energy food, and they start building their own structure which is called a reef. So they use the calcium carbonate, which is again your limestone, and make this entire building. So they are literally building skyscrapers inside the ocean and then living inside it. Okay, now like any building, you need a lot of finances and you need a lot of manpower and energy to build a building, right? So the corals may not be able to get all the energy by just filter feeding. So what it does, it allows algae to live inside its body. So the algae, which is called zooxanthellae, that lives inside the body, small unicellular algae that live inside the body, they become like a tenant. Okay, so the coral, that is the polyp, is like the landlord, and the algae which is living inside the body is like the tenant. Okay, so now the tenant is living inside the house, so it has to pay some rent. You also, your family also might be paying rent to a landlord to stay inside your home, right? So the same way, these algae also, they have to pay rent. So what kind of, they will not pay cash. What they will do is, they'll use the sunlight, they'll prepare their own food, and they will give the excess food to the polyp. Yeah, so the polyp will then use the food as a maintenance charge, and then use the maintenance charge to maintain the building. So this is the kind of symbiotic relationship that the corals, polyp in the corals and the algae have. They just slowly grow to outwards. right? Like a budding organism, right? Now, as I was saying, you must have heard about things like, sorry, coral bleaching. Okay, now coral bleaching, what does coral bleaching mean is, when there's a lot of, when now there's global warming, there's a lot of temperature rise, what happens is that the water sometimes becomes very, very hot. Okay, now let's take example of your mom. Okay, your mom cooks for you, she makes meals for you, right? Now what will happen if there's just too much heat, when during the summer, when there's just too much heat, there's a lot of if the cooking in the kitchen becomes very hot, your mom says ki, "Nahi, today I'm not cooking, I'm bored, I'm very hot, I'm going to order from outside," right? But for a algae which is doing that, it's not possible. It cannot say ki, "Nahi, I'm going to order from Ola and get some food from outside." So what happens is, when there's too much of heat, instead of making food, it starts making poison. So now, when a tenant is making nuisance, the landlord will get angry, right? So what the landlord, that is a polyp, does is that it kicks the coral, it kicks the algae out of the body, and usually the coral gets its color from the colors of the algae, right? So because of that, the color of the coral fades and becomes white. That is what is called coral bleaching. Okay, so coral bleaching is what happens when the temperature rises too much and the algae is kicked out of the body of the coral. Now, if the temperature normalizes again, then the algae will come back into the body of the coral. But sometimes, because of global warming and global climate change, what happens is the temperature doesn't normalize. So then it becomes very difficult for the algae to come back, and it becomes very difficult for the polyps to maintain the building on their own. So it becomes like a crumbling building. So sometimes there are so many buildings that are not maintained properly, that people do not pay the maintenance. So what happens is, slowly the buildings start crumbling. So then the same way, the corals also get different diseases, and different are attacked by different algae and different kind of other organisms, and they slowly break off. So coral bleach coral doesn't mean that the coral is dead necessary, but it leads to a lot of different diseases that later on kills the coral slowly, right? So that's why the global temperature rise, the ocean acidification, all these are negatively impacting these corals a lot, right, across the globe. And that's why climate change and global warming, as ocean acidification, are very, very negative impacts on the ocean. And slowly, if there is no corals, then the corals also, when the corals are dead, then it also creates a negative impact on all the different marine life that I have shown you, that are associated to the corals.